Hello, class. This is Professor Fisher again, continuing with the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the other half of the autonomic nervous system in the peripheral nervous system. All right, so you can have somatic, which is the voluntary portion. Then you have the other half is autonomic. We break down the autonomic into sympathetic, which is fight or flight, which is when you're working, when you're exercising, when you're kind of on the go. And then your parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, sort of like you're maintaining body function, your homeostasis, the other 16 hours of the day when you're not, in go mode. Okay. So here we have just talking about the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So it maintains function of your body, digestion. They usually say after you eat, people say you get the itis. Your food, your body's working. Your stomach is actually moving. The intestines are actually squeezing and moving as they're grinding up the food chemically and mechanically to digest the food in your body. Things such as urine formation, your bloodstream, the blood that pumps through your body passes through your kidneys. And there's a filtration process, which is this nephron tubule. And so that whole process happens primarily when we are in our rest and digest mode, right? So your body, when urine formation is very important when you get to the urinary chapter 24, I believe, in the second part of this class. That's going to be very important because that's, balancing your blood pressure, balancing the water concentration in your body. Your kidneys help with a lot of that, right? So this is all part of the rest and digest, things you do when you're sort of turned down, okay? And it's known as the craniosacral division because it's primarily at the superior portion of your spinal cord in your cranial nerves in your brain, and then also at the most inferior portion at your sacral region of your spinal cord in the sacral plexus. Okay, so this is just showing you the diagram. So you see from the brain, part of the brain stem and the superior portion of the spinal cord. These are the nerves that are associated with the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest. Vagus nerve goes into your thoracic and abdominal viscera. You have glossopharyngeal. Facial nerve goes to your face, oculomotor to your eyes. Okay, and then you also have down here your pelvic nerves, which is going to go to your pelvic area, your bladder, for instance, things like that. All right, so here we have all right, so parasympathetic cranial nerves associated with the oculomotor, your cranial nerve 3, facial, cranial nerve 7, glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve 9, and your vagus, or vagus, whatever you like to say, cranial nerve 10, right? All right, so your vagus nerves is your main parasympathetic nerve, right? So most of your cranial nerves, as you'll see, go to areas, your face, your mouth, your ears, right? The vagus nerve doesn't go to the face, mouth, and ears. It goes into your thoracic and abdominal cavities, right? So vagus nerves contributes to the cardiac, that's your heart, your pulmonary, your lungs, and your esophageal plexuses, okay? So that's what your vagus nerves contributes to. This is some other nerves that are represented in the parasympathetic cranial nerves. Here we have the facial nerves, which are represented here, as well as the optic ganglia, your eyes. So there's different effects on these different areas when you're in the parasympathetic, using your parasympathetic nervous system. You're in the rest or digest mode. Right? We also have the sacral nerves, which are at the lower portion or the inferior portion of your spinal cord, and they innervate large intestines, digestion, urinary bladder, producing urine, and your reproductive organs. Obviously, if you are in if you are in fight or flight, you're not in, well, depending on who, how you like to do what you do, but you're not in, when your reproductive organs are active, you're not in fight or flight, you're more in rest and digest. It's more of a relaxation kind of thing, right? And your body's using that, well, you get it. So, right, so these parasympathetic sacral nerves, we see this pelvic splanchnic nerves form this plex nerve. That's another nerve plexus. Remember the nerve plexus is a highly network, a dense network of nerves. That's a nerve plexus. So there's a form of the pelvic splanchnic nerves, forms a nerve plexus on the pelvic floor, right? So that's an area that's going to be active, like I said, when we are in rest and digest. Right, and it says here, most synapse in terminal ganglia within walls of target organs, right? So they synapse right in the walls of the target organs, okay? Both pre and post ganglionic parasympathetic neurons release ACH, that's your acetylcholine, at their synapses, and is generally excitatory. So yes, we have the pre and post ganglionic parasympathetic neurons both release the acetylcholine at their synapses, and it's generally the effect is to excite. Okay, so there's different receptors listed here, and I don't necessarily need you to memorize the receptors, but you can see them: the nicotinic receptors, muscarinic receptors. In the membranes of the postganglionic neuron, membranes of parasympathetic target cells, okay? But just the thing that you need to remember here is highlighted in red is that that we're using the acetylcholine as their primary neurotransmitter to transmit the signal, electrical signal, converts it into this chemical signal, which is then eventually sent to the target cells to get them to respond when we are in rest and digest. Effects on, here's some of these next couple slides talk about some of the different effects that we have. So this is, to remember, so we have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. This is part of the peripheral nervous system. Break it down into the motor division of the peripheral nervous system, and then specifically the autonomic nervous system, which is the involuntary portion of the motor division of your peripheral nervous system. And then now we've broken it down into sympathetic, which is your fight and flight, and then your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest. And so what effects does your nervous system, what effects does the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest portion of your involuntary motor division of your peripheral nervous system, have on different organs? And so notice right away that your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, some of them affect some similar. For instance, we talked about when you're in fight or flight, your sympathetic nervous system will cause your heart rate to increase, will cause your heart to beat, have stronger heartbeat. So you pump more blood per beat and you pump more often, right? Whereas now compare that with the parasympathetic. When you're in rest and digest, the activity decreases. It decreases your heart rate and your blood pressure. So less beats per minute. Obviously, if you're resting, you don't need as much blood pumped through your body, and your blood pressure is lower, right? Preganglionic parasympathetic neurons travel to the heart with the vagus nerve. So that vagus nerve that we mentioned before, cranial nerve 10, is very active in this role. This slide has a bunch of other effects on smooth muscle. As listed here, as you see here, postganglionic neurons innervate smooth muscle cells in many organs with the following effects, right? Constriction of your pupils. Remember, in sympathetic, your pupils dilate. In parasympathetic, your pupils constrict. You don't need as much light coming into your eyes. Notice constriction of bronchioles. When you're in sympathetic, fight or flight, you need more oxygen to feed those muscles. But when you're resting, rest and digest, you can reduce the amount of airflow. Remember, this is called rest and digest for a reason. As you see here, peristalsis, that's also by that vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10, produces rhythmic contractions. The peristalsis propels food through your digestive tract. So we know that food needs to be propelled through your digestive tract. That digestion of your food happens when you are in rest and digest. Your parasympathetic is active. Promotes urination and defecation, also controlled by your vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10, and some of your sacral nerves, right? So urination, creation of your urine and urination, defecation, going to the bathroom, 1 and number 2, those things happen when you're in rest and digest, right? So if you're feeling like, oh man, I haven't done number 2 all day, you probably were nervous, or you probably were uncomfortable, or you probably were tense, or you probably were turned up, and that's why it didn't happen. But once you rest, a lot of times people, once they rest and they go home, go someplace that's comfortable, then they can go, and it's very easy, right? So that's one of the reasons why that can happen, right? So this is some of the responses of your parasympathetic nervous system on different parts of your body, all right? We also have on glandular cells, all right? So we talked about on cardiac muscle, on smooth muscle, which is most of your organs. Remember, smooth muscle is involuntary muscle. Remember that. And then we talked about different types of muscle tissue: cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, smooth muscle. But then also there's an effect on glandular epithelial cells, right? So tear production. So when you're watching that sad movie and you start crying, you're probably in rest and digest. Okay. Increased production of saliva when we're eating, for instance. Rest and digest. Notice that when you're exercising or you're on the treadmill or something like that, you don't have an appetite. But it's once you stop and your heart rate goes down and you relax, then you realize, oh, I'm hungry, and more saliva's in your mouth. And you start to feel like, I want to eat something now. It's usually like a little bit after you work out where the hunger really starts to settle in. That's because you've gone into rest and digest, and your body's saying, I'm hungry now. I'm ready to intake some food, digest some things. Right? This is a nice diagram putting it all together. So you can see the effects of the parasympathetic nervous system on different parts of your body. Notice that vagus nerve, which is is cranial nerve 10, right? And so notice it affects the heart, the lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, and even the kidneys, right? Then you also have your pelvic nerves, which affects the bladder, and the rectum, that's your defecation and urination. Some of your facial nerves, cranial nerve 7, affects the eye and the face, right? Now we have some side effects. There are definitely some drugs that can affect your parasympathetic nervous system. I didn't highlight any of these. They're not in red, they're not in yellow. You don't have to memorize these, but just some good things to know. So because urinary is parasympathetic and defecation is also parasympathetic, if a drug affects your parasympathetic nervous system, it can cause you to be constipated. It can cause you to have urinary retention, right? So make it difficult for you to go to the bathroom, 1 or number 2, okay? So blocking, as you see, urinary retention, blocking the relaxing effect of the parasympathetic nervous system has on urinary sphincters, makes it passing urine more difficult. Also on the smooth muscle of the digestive tract. If your body doesn't push that waste, the waste after it digests the nutrients from your food, the waste that's left in your food, if it doesn't continue to push it through your digestive tract to where it gets into your rectum and eventually it's something that you eliminate from your body, if that parasympathetic nervous system is blocked and the signal is not sent to continue to push that that waste product through your small intestines, large intestines, what happens? It gets stuck and you get constipated. Same thing with the urine. If it doesn't like give the signal to be able to urinate, urine sort of gets stuck in your body and you have difficulty going to the bathroom, right? Also, dry mouth. Saliva is something that's produced when we're in our rest and digest and by a parasympathetic nervous system. So if you have something that's blocking that signal, that nerve, as we talked about, the cranial nerve 7 and 9, which lead to increased production of saliva, if those are blocked, then you would have what we call dry mouth. So there are drugs that inadvertently do that. Okay, so just some side effects, how they can, because they affect your parasympathetic nervous system and the signal that they send to different parts of the body can cause some of these different issues. Okay, so that's sort of taking it from the book, the anatomy and physiology book, putting it into some real life applications. Hopefully this all makes sense. If you have any questions, email me, text me, set up a Zoom conference with me or something, right? And that's the end of that section.